From the JAMA Network, this is JAMA Pediatrics Author Interviews. Conversations with authors exploring the latest clinical research, reviews, and opinions featured in JAMA Pediatrics.
Hello again, podcast listeners. This is Dimitri Christakis, Editor-in-Chief of JAMA Pediatrics, coming to you once again this month with my friend, colleague, Associate Editor, Dr. Alison Galbraith from Boston Medical Center. Hi, Allie. How are you?
Hi, good to be here.
It's good to have you. As loyal listeners know, we have a new and improved format where we bring in an esteemed expert to talk about an important and pressing issue in pediatrics and use a recently published article in JAMA Pediatrics as our springboard. And today is no exception. We have Dr. Tom Robinson from Stanford. Tom, good to have you here.
Hi, Dimitri and Allie. Great to be here with you.
Welcome.
Great to have you. I look forward to hearing your thoughts on the current and future state of pediatric obesity. Allie, what got us thinking about obesity this month?
Yeah, so we have a paper by Michelle Wynn and colleagues from the University of Toronto and Harvard. It's titled Consumption of 100% Fruit Juice and Body Weight in Children and Adults, a Systematic Review and Meta-Analysis. So they did this because, I didn't realize this, but there's mixed evidence about the relationship between consumption of 100% fruit juice and weight gain in children and adults. There's a lot of dietary guidelines, and I know the AAP has guidelines about this. So they wanted to do a systematic review and meta-analysis to compile a bunch of different studies. They used prospective cohort studies and randomized controlled trials. They all had to compare fruit juice with non-caloric controls. And their outcomes were change in BMI for children and change in body weight for adults. So what they found was there were 42 studies total, 17 among children. None of those were RCTs. And there were 25 among adults, which were a mix of observational and RCTs. And among the cohort studies in children, they found that each additional serving per day of 100% fruit juice was associated with a 0.03 higher BMI change, and the effect was larger for younger kids. And then in cohort studies in adults, they found that if they didn't adjust for energy, there was greater body weight gain than studies that did adjust for energy intake. And the randomized trials didn't see a significant association between fruit juice consumption and body weight. So the conclusions were that for children, a serving a day of 100% fruit juice was associated with BMI increase. In adults, there was a significant association in studies unadjusted for energy intake, suggesting mediation by calories. So they were supporting recommendations to limit consumption of fruit juice.
Why don't you get us started, Allie? What is your question here for Dr. Tom Robinson about this study or about obesity in general?
Well, so I'm interested, I know you've done a lot of work with kind of multi-component interventions, and, those are expensive and complicated, and how effective are those sorts of interventions versus, say, one targeted thing like juice, right? Like targeting, changing intake of juice.
One of the reasons we've gone after the multi-factor interventions and the multi-setting interventions, multi-level interventions, is that a lot of the single interventions, the single nutrient interventions, or single food interventions, really are better for looking at mechanisms and cause and effect relationships with individual foods. But in the real world, people don't eat foods in isolation or nutrients in isolation. Instead, they're mixed in with a whole bunch of different behaviors that either can synergize with them to promote better outcomes or interfere with changes that you're hoping to see. So as a result, we've taken the approach that if we're trying to develop an evidence base for interventions that will be used in the real world, or we need to design interventions that will address the multiple levels of influence on children's nutrition, physical activity, screen time that are believed or hypothesized to determine kids' changes in weight.
Mm-hmm.
To follow up on that, if I gave you a magic wand today with which you could do one thing and one thing only, but you could do it completely and effectively to stem the tide of pediatric obesity or maybe even reduce pediatric obesity, what would that be? I mean, you could eliminate junk food. You could eliminate television. What would you do?
Yeah, that's sort of an unfair question, Dimitri, but I think about it the other way. I think about what is the one cause? And then we can think about the factors of it. The one cause, I would say, is capitalism. And not that I would get rid of capitalism, because I think there's many positive parts to it, but so many of the influences on weight and on children's weight result from our emphasis on promoting consumption and decreasing effort. So everything from the automobile and the remote control to advertising in the media for food to making food and calories highly palatable, super cheap, omnipresent, everywhere you go, has really driven this. So there's not one thing that I think would solve this problem. Now, I like to choose things that I think will have the greatest effect. And of those things, as you know, I share an interest with you in the effects of media and technology. I think one of those would be limiting technology use in kids and actually getting rid of the business model that drives the technology industry, the entertainment industry, and others, which you can sort of categorize as sedentary behavior industry and the food consumption industries, to not necessarily do everything they can to keep people on their devices and on their screens and to have them consume the most calorie-dense and cheapest and nutritionally devoid foods.
Do you think that could be harnessed to have a more positive impact? But I understand that the screen time, that stuff keeps you from being physically active, but could there be ways to make capitalism incentivize people to eat more fruits and vegetables and make that more palatable or cheaper or something like that?
Yeah, I think then you go to another solution, which is changing our broken food system. Many of the incentives that are created in our food system really are driving the food environment that we have, including the foods that are advertised and the foods that are promoted. And in that way, if we could change the incentives so it favored more nutritious foods, more fresh whole fruits and vegetables, fewer packaged processed foods, fewer high calorie, high sugar, high salt, high fat foods that are shelf stable, highly palatable, that sort of drive overeating, then that would make a big difference. That's why I say I wouldn't get rid of capitalism. I think capitalism has a lot of positives.
Is there a model that proves your point?
No, I think it goes back to the fact that there was much less obesity before around the 1980s in this country and across the world. And what has really changed has been this supercharging of all of these forces that are driving us towards making food available everywhere and calories available everywhere and cheap, and making really engineering physical activity out of our lives in so many different ways.
You've been, I think, doing incredibly innovative and impactful research for quite a while in this space. Tell me, is there any way to re-engineer this? It feels somewhat hopeless. I mean, we can sit here and blame the food industry and blame the readily available high-dense caloric foods, but there's no readily available solution that anyone's come up with that has any sustainability or even proof that it works long-term.
Yeah, that's true. This is a really tough nut to crack, and a lot of it is related to this toxic environment that we've created over time. So even our interventions, even our most powerful interventions that can produce changes in the short term, frequently those effects go away over time once the interventions end. And maybe that shouldn't be surprising. That's the same thing we see with medications, with pharmacologic treatments and others. So why should our behavioral treatments be held to a higher standard than that? But it's really tough when you send people back into that environment that led to their problems in the first place. And there are answers. A lot of the multi-level approaches are trying to get at answers at the policy level that will synergize with answers in the community level and regulatory levels, at the family level, at the individual behavior level, in schools. And so we're all trying to do our part to really change things in a way that will help produce that whole of society approach that many of us in this field believe is needed to really address this problem.
I want to get back to something you just said about lasting changes, like interventions and then people are thrown back into it. And I'm curious about your thoughts about interventions like these new GLP-1 agonists where they're not ready for kids yet, but when you think that will happen, A, and B, if you stop taking them, then you're back at it again.
Yeah, I mean, they are ready for kids now. Kids are using them now. They're being prescribed. They're approved. At least the initial one is approved down through adolescence, and there's a good clinical trial to show its efficacy. That is another one of these that you have to take forever, right?
Well, we don't know that, Tom. I mean, you don't know that. I mean, we don't know that any more than we know what the long-term side effects are, but keep going.
As far as we know, when you stop taking them, people gain the weight back. So we don't know that they're going to have to be taken forever. But like behavioral interventions, like other medications, and like I said before, maybe we shouldn't expect them to change. I mean, the effects that these have actually reduce people's appetites. They reduce their intake of food. I have some concerns about them. I think they are incredible. We have never seen an advance like this in childhood obesity in as long as I've been around, and we've been hoping for something like this. The effects are just dramatic, not necessarily for everybody, but for a vast majority of people who use them, they see dramatic effects. And for individuals, especially those for whom obesity is a big medical, physiologic, or psychological or social problem, these can be life-changing. In fact, they are life-changing. I mean, I've seen it happen. On the other hand, I tend to be cautious, and maybe that's because I'm a pediatrician, and I tend to worry about growth and development and giving drugs that affect nutrition so dramatically and affect parts of the body we don't even really know exactly how these drugs work. We know some of the mechanisms, but we don't know what they're doing to all the organs of the body or all the cells of the body. I really don't know that we know enough yet about what effects these have on development. These kids are still developing their brains, they're still developing their bodies, what long-term effects these are going to have. That being said, they really do have dramatic effects. The other thing I worry about quite a bit is disparities, in that usually when you introduce a new innovation like this, you see a widening of disparities, not a narrowing. And that's because of the access that people have to these drugs and to any new innovation. One of the problems with this particular disease is that it tends to affect people at the lower end of the socioeconomic scale more than people at the other end, at the higher end. And those are the people who are at greatest need, but also have the least access to these drugs. And are
They're
going to
so
have
expensive, right?
Yeah, expense, as well as just getting access to them, whether you're insured or not, whether they're available. All the other reasons we see why these disparities exist for many other problems as well are going to exist here. And that's something that's going to make obesity and the morbidities associated with obesity actually get worse in portions of our population, while another population is getting better.
Those disparities that you describe are real and they're disturbing. But the truth is, for the multimodal interventions you're talking about, those barriers still exist. It's hard for low-income families to come to evening sessions for motivational training. They don't have the same level of access to digital technologies for telehealth or telemedicine. This is an economic problem. Like, we can fix this, right? We can just make a commitment to provide this drug like we did COVID vaccine, free to everybody that meets certain criteria, and make it available. To me, it's an opportunity to level the playing field more than a lot of other interventions that we've previously piloted and studied.
These disparities don't necessarily occur just for the financial reasons. I mean, there are many other barriers to receiving access to care and access to new medications, same as we deal with in the community. Although we made COVID vaccines free, we certainly didn't have even distribution of them and even uptake of them. There are large populations and large segments of society, for one reason or another, that avoided the vaccines and didn't get access to those vaccines. So I don't think money is clearly the answer in making them available. With our interventions that we do directly try and address that. So almost all of my studies have been with low income and groups that are underrepresented or underserved. And so, for example, we do home-based interventions where we send health educators to the home, help them organize their home, for example, to make it a more healthful environment, to make it easier to do that. We help them by helping them get access to fresh fruits and vegetables. We do things where we work with after-school programs, at Boys and Girls Clubs or WISE or Parks and Rec sites or PAL centers that are in the neighborhoods where kids are. So the kids have someplace to go after school. Their parents don't have to supervise them necessarily. So they're not sitting home in front of the TV and the refrigerator. They're doing something that's physically active, that's highly motivating. The other thing is that we focus a lot in our work on motivation. And not just motivation to change to get the outcome, but motivation for the process. So a lot of our interventions are working with our populations that we work with to identify what they would do anyway, even if it wasn't healthy for them. Things like the after-school sports and the after-school dance programs that we've run. That is not because kids want to come in and do something for their health. It's because they want to be on a team. They want to have a uniform. They want to have cool coaches who are hanging out with them. Those types of things that we build in. They want to do choreography. They want to learn about dances that are native to their culture. And so we work a lot on identifying activities that aren't something that people do because they're good for them, but they do them because they enjoy doing them. And then the health benefits are something we get as a side effect. So a lot of it is trying to re-engineer opportunities for families who may not have those opportunities in a way that they will utilize them and meets their needs. We have our obesity treatment program is a family-based behavioral program, 6 months of weekly visits in a group setting. We've designed it in a way that we get outstanding retention, not because people are so motivated when they start. It's hard. It's hard to come every week to a program like that, but they're getting something out of it. They're getting the community aspect of it. They're learning from their peers and other families. We're meeting their needs in other ways that makes it worth their while to participate in a program like that.
First of all, I think the community work you're doing is fabulous. And I think the important thing that you noted is that it's not just about obesity, but it's about other ancillary benefits of building community and a sense of belonging and a sense of cultural. All of those things are fantastic. But as you said earlier, the effect size is still small and difficult to sustain. What I wonder about is the sweet spot in this, because I share your concern, quite apart from the fact we don't know the long-term effects of these drugs. There's ample reason to be concerned both about the developing brain in young children and the potential that you're putting a 12-year-old on a drug for 60 or 70 years. That is in and of itself worrisome because the cumulative effects could exceed any short or medium term effects that we see. But is it possible the sweet spot, a combination of things? Because that's where I think one might be particularly sanguine, right? I mean, children, precisely because they're developing habits and they're developing metabolic set points. It may very well be that unlike the studies that have been done in adults that show that they regain the weight, children, a short-term treatment with these GLP-1s as part of an integrated behavioral program that tries to get their weight down and get them into your activities might prove even more fruitful.
What you brought up is the synergy with behavioral methods. People are using these drugs alone, even though they're recommended to be used with a behavioral program. Now, people who are mainly focused on the weight loss, they not necessarily benefit from the additional behavioral program.
Right.
But one of the big aspects, these drugs, as effective and amazing as they are at reducing weight and many of the comorbidities that go with excess weight, they do not all of a sudden make you start to eat more vegetables. So these drugs don't really address the underlying behavior. They actually may reduce your screen time. We don't know. There's some interesting, intriguing work about addictive behaviors that these drugs tend to address other addictions. That's a hypothesis that we're very interested in. But they don't change your behavior to being more healthful. They just address the weight problem as far as we know. Now, it looks like in the adult studies to date that reduces risk of heart disease and potentially could reduce risk of cancers and other obesity-related morbidities and mortalities, and that would be outstanding. But there's lots of other health problems associated with a poor diet and other things that in developmental processes in kids that we need to address as well. So I definitely believe that they ought to be done in the context of also helping families learn to improve their health-related behaviors. The other point you made, Dimitri, too, about set point is an interesting one. And a lot of people don't really talk about set points as much anymore because it tends to be sort of a one-way ratchet for a set point, is that your body defends its highest body weight that it's achieved. So people who lose weight, actually their body tries to get them back up to that heavier weight. And you see that in the reduction in their metabolic weight, the increase in their appetite. And so you see that the set points that exist tend to be, once you've gained extra weight, once you're suffering from obesity, that's sort of going to be the set point for you.
Even for children who are growing. That's why I asked about children who are growing. Can they grow into their set point, so to speak?
There's much less that we know about that, and it's possible that that could be the case, but there's not a lot of evidence. And actually, we could start to look at that. Maybe it has been examined already, and I'm just not aware of it. And like patients who undergo bariatric surgery, adolescents who undergo bariatric surgery would be a good population to see that in and do the same metabolic studies that they've done in adults that show that. And there will be a large population of kids who are getting these medications who could be studied for that as well.
With these meds, but also with behavioral interventions, is there a time that they are most effective? Aside from the set point idea, are there developmental periods where kids are more susceptible to changing their activity behavior or their eating behaviors? Should we be doing these multi-component interventions when they're really small, when they're adolescents?
The importance is matching the intervention to the age or the developmental stage or the context. Many of us believe that we're going to have to intervene lifelong, and we should be intervening lifelong. I mean, we should still be intervening in older adults as well to try and help them control their weight, right? And so it's a lifelong thing, but you want to match the intervention to that part of their life. In very young children, it's all the parent. Even children up to about 7 or 8, in our experience, you're really intervening with the parents and in the home. Once you get to be about 7 or 8, kids start to have some agency of their own and be able to then make their own decisions and make some changes themselves. That's why a lot of our behavioral interventions that focus on kids start around 3rd grade or so, start around age 8, and then go on through there. And many of those, we believe, especially in that sort of 8 to 15 to middle adolescence period, are most effective if they're done with the family as the context, in the family setting, because it's both the kids and the need for the support from the family. Once you get beyond that, school-based programs that don't necessarily have the family support, or even during that middle school, high school period, or even in the elementary period, can be effective. And as kids get older, you're focusing much more on the kids and the young adults. And then you have other issues about partners and other family structures that come in as well. I think it's important for those of us who think very behaviorally about intervention design, it's matching our intervention to the specific person and their context.
Tom, we could talk to you all day. I want to thank you so much for being our guest, taking some time out of your busy schedule, and equally important for your longstanding commitment to trying to solve this problem and your thoughtful comments both today and in general. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, great stuff.
Thank you very much. One thing I can say too about this is that it took a long time for tobacco interventions to sort of hit their stride. And the same thing with obesity. I think more and more great ideas are coming in. And now with the advent of these new medications and the understanding that comes with them, I think we may learn a lot more.
This episode was produced by Shelley Steffens at the JAMA Network. To follow this and other JAMA Network podcasts, please visit us online at jamanetworkaudio.com. Thanks for listening.